Yahweh reigneth, he is clothed with majesty.
Yahweh is clothed with strength. He girdeth himself.
The world also is established, that it cannot be moved.
Thy throne is established of
The floods have lifted up, O Lord, the floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves.
Yahweh on high is mightier
Than the noise of many waters, than the mighty waves of the sea. Thy testimonies.
Hello, good morning, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. I just noticed my fan was making a ton of noise out of nowhere, so we're going to take a... I just got to touch it, so we're going to just... 1 second. I'll let you hear it. There, lady. There we go. Ah, the fan just needed a little soothing. All right. Paper everywhere. All right. Well, that was strange. You know, it was fine right before we got started, so I don't know. Just that was the moment I decided it was going to go vibrating. Oh, wait, up a little more. There we go. All right. So, we're in Psalm 78. We got up to about verse 12 talking about it, so let's read it again and so see where we go. All right. Excellent. Maskil of Asaph. I'm going to sip of coffee for this one. It's a long song. It's good on the vocals, too. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he hath done. I want to comment on that just before we move on. Just you notice like when they were, because I didn't say this last time, and we're not going to go back, and I'll probably forget by the time we get to the end. We will not hide from their children. The children of our fathers, you know, that is the grandchildren. But when it's said like that, it's interesting to me because it makes me think, you know, that what we owe to the future is also a debt to the past. That which our ancestors gave us, we owe a debt to them to pass on to the future children, which are also their concern. Because, you know, what's the point of striving in this world and making your way and raising children if not to leave some kind of legacy? And, you know, a lot of times that legacy for people, it's riches and stuff, but there's a more important legacy which is being talked about here, which is that inheritance of Israel, to which we have also claimed through the blood of Christ, which is the veil through which we enter into the holiest of holies. All right, so I just that struck me as I went by, and I'm not gonna say the other thing that struck me because that wasn't. I can go back and comment on that one. But all right, verse 5. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might it might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. Oops. Wrong button. All right. Verse 9. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God, and refused to walk in his law, and forgat his works and his wonders that he had showed them. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea, and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as an heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with the light of a fire. I don't know why I put an article in there. By the light, and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness, and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock, and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempt God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. And they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. I know I didn't see the past tense there. Yea, they spake against God. They said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock that the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was wroth. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and an anger also came up against Israel, because they believed not in God, and trusted not in his salvation. Though he had commanded the clouds from above, and opened the doors of heaven, and had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven, man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathers fowls like as the sand of the sea. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp. They were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came upon them, and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel. For all this they sinned still, and believed not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and inquired early after God. And they remembered that God was their rock, and the high God their Redeemer. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth, and they lied unto him with their tongues, for their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity, and destroyed them not. Yea, many a time turned he his anger away, and did not stir up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passeth away, and cometh not again. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness, and grieve him in the desert? Yea, they turned back and tempted God, and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy. How he had wrought his signs in Egypt, and his wonders in the field of Zoan, and had turned their rivers into blood, and their floods that they could not drink. He sent diverse sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them. He gave also their increase unto the caterpillar, and their labor unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave up their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to hot thunderbolts. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation, and trouble, by sending evil angels among them. He made a way to his anger. He spared not their soul from death, but gave their life over to the pestilence, and smote all the firstborn of Egypt. The chief of their strength in the tabernacles of Ham, but made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they feared not, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain which his right hand hath purchased. He cast out the heathen. He cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. For they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacles of Shiloh and the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hand. He gave his people over also unto the sword, and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. Then the Lord awaked as one out of a sleep. Why do I keep adding a and? Hold on, let me have a sip of coffee. Let's try this line a little better. Then the Lord awaked as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man that shouteth by reason of wine. And he smote his enemies in the hinder parts. He put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim. But chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like high places, like the earth which he hath established forever. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes great with young. He brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. I do think it is a retrospective again, but also a like the last verse. It's like it does feel more like a post-captivity Asaph, because of the degree to which the provocation. Yes, there were provocations in the days of the judges, but when he looks at David, he's nostalgic for what he sees as the peak of Israel, when they were well led. In spite of David's personal moral failings, that was not the general order of the day. He had some big, there was the adultery murder thing, which was severe, and for which he had to suffer some pretty severe consequences. I mean, in so much as God was not willing to take his mercy from him. Because since God would not take his mercy from David, the consequences could only go so far. But still, it was still something. It was not any small thing that he suffered because of his sin. Anyways, I don't want to go into that because there's so much to talk about here. But I think he's looking at David as that ideal king who did, as far as leading his people, he led them well, and he was a just king to people, with few exceptions. And then and so that and so as that, he is sort of the he is of course a type of Christ, because Christ is the son of David, and David is that type of righteous king, not himself perfect. In fact, in the scriptures, that is one of the main themes of the end of his life, that he would not be allowed to build God's temple. That would be done by his son, because he said, David, you're a bloody man, and my temple will be built by a man of peace, not a man of war. David had a lot of blood on his hands. Okay, and so, this is a pretty merciless critique of ancient Israel, by ancient Israel. And, it's just it is the story of the Old Testament. God reaching, at first you encounter Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but there's always, there's always human problems in human life. And Jacob's life was filled with, some questionable thing. People often, sometimes they rip on the forefathers because of what they see as maybe moral failings and stuff. But they are not, what it's showing is that they're not the ideal man, but they are faithful men. You know what I mean? And so, while we have some examples of faithful men, also we have an example of the nation that goes astray. And boy, it just does it constantly. And it is because, and of course, humanity is just, it's hard for people when we get blessed. I was thinking about, I was working outside. Oh, whatever. But I was thinking about like the modern era, post-World War II. Like, it's hard to get that victory in World War II over the Nazis and then come out of that and not have like just too much of a puffed up attitude. Like, we're really great. We're really something. And that rubs off. And when when you triumph over evil, over obvious things where you were on the right side and stuff like that, and then the next generation comes along and they start feeling entitled and they stop, the things that got you to greatness, the struggles you battled through. It's like, while on an individual basis, we may, in a time when everyone else is having a great time, there are people who are struggling and suffering and so on and so forth. It's not the same for everybody. But in such an attitude, in such an environment, complacency, and cyclically throughout history, that's kind of the thing. Is like people they become complacent. And that's what it's talking about, basically, is, well, that's what we're observing. I'm saying that is one of the causes of why from generation, because even though, like, you can pass it on, you can have a family that passes it on very faithfully, but some people go astray. They forget. It says forget. That might be generous. Maybe they just don't believe. Like it says, they kept not faith. So marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. And one of the things I didn't address last time is I realized I kind of started with verse 2. To my law. I just wanted to just reiterate that this part, that we didn't really talk about that. The words of his mouth are kind of his law. And the law means, usually means to point the way, the correct way of doing things. And so, and also, that which orders and binds our behavior, or the words which we accept as being the right way to behave, and also sometimes in the law there's punishment and such. But it's interesting that it's law, a parable, dark sayings, all those things, because there is a commandment implicit that we should not follow after the same example of unbelief, like Paul said, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I mean, because really there it is very much laid out very explicitly, like, hey, these are examples that we should not follow them in their folly. And generation after generation does anyways. Again, and there's a lot of calls setting their heart aright. That is something that we can only do by taking an interest in what is right and what is wrong in the first place. And not just like in the sense of like, should I kill or should I not kill? Should I commit adultery? That kind of right and wrong. But the first and most important of all the commandments, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. It almost seems like a strange thing to command love and to command obedience and service. But that is the first and primary commandment, because, and the way I've always not always, but the way I explained it when it was put to me, because I never considered, oh, well, why? Why is that the way it should be? I mean, maybe it's self-evident, there's no reason. It should be almost self-evident. Because, God is so much greater and like a parent to the child. A child, though by nature, owes the parent certain things as far as they should listen and do what they're told because the parent's looking out for them, ideally, obviously. And so also, if we are to enter into a relationship where we think God is looking out for us, fine, but we have to trust him and believe in him. In spite of the fact that he, unlike our parent, isn't obviously and apparently right there with us. I can look over and see my father. I can go drive over to his house and say, there's my old dad. And when I was a child, he was there. He was up there. God? I don't know where he is. Well, I do know, but I can't see him. Only through, the Spirit could I, see him in the sense of, like in the sense that Jesus said, they shall see God. You don't have to actually see him visibly to have the vision of God, to know what God is, and to be able to have that mental picture. Not a mental picture of an image of a man so much, but of a fullness of what a being is, which is more about who they are, as opposed to what form they take. It's a much more essential way to understand and to know and to see God, to see him as he is. We don't see him as he is. It says, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Because there's something in our vision that we don't see Christ as he truly is, because we cannot fully see him. Not just the fact that he's invisible, because literally we can't see him, he's not with us, but also the same thing that the things which are not given us of the Spirit, the revelation which is not known, the mysteries that still remain. We have much revealed to us, but there's always something deeper to know. And there's always a sense in which we see through a glass darkly. We do not know exactly what form these things are supposed to take because we do not fully comprehend the form that Christ is. And I mean that beyond the outward external appearance. And when Paul refers to these things in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, or is it chapter 9? Did I say 10? Is it wrong? Is it 9? Verse 10, 11, and 12 or something like that? Let me just check that real quick. Maybe it's 1 Corinthians 9. I don't know if it's 10, isn't it? Yeah, it's 10. Okay. And then he talks about the same things. But the conclusion of the matter is in verse 11. Yeah, right there. All these things happen to them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. You got to take heed to these examples. There's, temptation, etc. But we can, let us not tempt Christ. Let us not lust after evil things as they also lusted, as it's very clearly here. The food was one of the big ones. So marvelous things did he in the sight of the Father. He divided the sea. He showed, and he goes into details. I'm not going to try to lay everyone out because the psalm is already a long psalm in which he lays it all out in detail. So it mostly requires commentary. Like, well, how can these things be? Because that's how I feel about it. I feel like this is one of those things where it's like translation. You were listening when I read it, right? It's like, it's one of the more, there are some obscure verses we definitely got to look at. So he divided the sea. They passed through the fields of Zoan. I was like, I didn't know. I wanted to say things that I think I remember about what that refers to. But, if you want to look into the geography and all that, it's the field of Zoan. I'm not sure if that's where Pharaoh laid out his chariots or whatever, where this came about or whatever. It's part of Egypt. It's part of the story. I forget how the field of Zoan fits in. That's why I copied it. I was going to be like, okay, let's... But again, it's the kind of thing you should look up into like an atlas probably or something like that. There's only 7 results in the entire scriptures. That first reference is no. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. The Zoan was a city, but there's also a field of Zoan, which is probably just the field outside of the Zoan. In fact, there. Okay. Let me just. I'm going to show you what I'm looking at because it's really not cool for me to do that without actually letting you see what I saw. There's only really 7 uses, and if you look at here, I'm like, there's a reason why. I know the Isaiah references, but if you look here, we have, here's a time reference. This is in Numbers. This is after the Exodus. Then this Psalm 78 is the next reference, and it's twice here, then a couple times in Isaiah. The princes of Zoan are fools, all that. I know the princes of Zoan, princes of Zoan. There's actually not references to Zoan, at least not as spelled that way or whatever, in Exodus, and I don't know exactly what it refers to. So there you go. But it is the prince. It is a city. If I had my companion Bible, you see, I'm like, a city in Egypt, blah 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 blah. All right, there you go. And the field is Zoan, like the field of. There was another city that had a field. Oh well. All right. Back we go. Okay, so he divided the sea and caused them to pass through. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud. There was a cloud that led them by day and a pillar of fire by night. He clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink out of the great depths. It was one of the things they murmured about. That isn't mentioned here. Paul mentions that they murmured about the water. He broke open the rocks and gave them drink as out of the great depths. The water that flowed from the rock, it was like it had come from deep underground. I mean, nice. I mean, not like surface water, but water from deep down, which is usually the good stuff. I mean, because I have a well, and it's the water here is great. I remember the first time I tasted it, I was like, it was different than what I was using. I said it tasted alive, and that's true because there are things living in it. But I was thinking, but also the water from the treated city water that I was used to, I would call it denatured, like it had been stripped of all nature and contact with the it's like it tastes, it's different. Mine's been sitting in a giant stone aquifer. It's got that mineral taste to it. Excellent. He brought the streams out of the rocks. He smote the rock. And then, and he had done these wonders for them. And of course, while they're in the wilderness, after he delivers them, after he brings them out, he does it a lot out of order. Like I said, he talks about the party in the Red Sea, and then he goes back and talks about the plagues of Egypt. You remember yesterday I was saying it's slightly out of order. And that's exactly right. It is slightly out of order. Because it's not about the order, it's just about his thought process of it. And like I said, it's not a strict chronology by any means. And he's talking about, like, they tempted God by asking for meat. God had given them water, and he had given them manna. And then they were not satisfied. And it wasn't that they were hungry, but it was like they wanted something a bit more savory. And this one speaks to me, because it's like, I know, whenever I've heard this, I always kind of like, am somewhat pricked in my heart, because I like my savory food. I mean, I like food that is rich with meats. I was insisted. My wife, I'm like, you've got to, I'm like, well, I know you like to make vegetable soup, but it has no flavor without meat in it. And to be mindful of the fact that it's like, those, I mean, the one thing I said pricks me slightly. Not that I would grumble against God per se, but I might. The point is, I have it in me to be that way. To be like, well, we're fed, but that wasn't very good. To not be grateful for the things you have, which is something He has indicated it's something we should be mindful of. There's always, we always like are covetous of some greater, more in the lust of it. And on some level, I mean, like, obviously, you need food, you need water, you need certain things, and your body craves them, right? But there are other cravings that go beyond what is necessary, and they're just about habit and about, my own. They're purely that my pleasure should be enhanced, right? And it seems to me that, like, as I look over the scriptures and stuff, it's like, as God in the world, and it's very apparent that the insistence on self-denial and of, like I said, self-limiting. We got to put limits on ourselves. We have to be capable. And that is part of what God teaches us through existing in this world. It's part of the lesson we learn is, I think we ought to learn, is like some sort of, if it is not already something that is given to us, because some people are very self-controlled, very moderate in their behaviors, and it comes very easily to them. You may think, whoa, who are you talking? Is that possible? It's like, no, absolutely. I mean, for whom that kind of moderation is not at all, a trouble, they'd be like, well, we have manna, isn't it good enough? And I'm sure some like you said, he didn't kill everybody. It was just the fattest of them, Oh, the meat, It's like I don't want to be so possessed of my appetites, because God can't have an eternity of people possessed of a limitless appetites. Yes, we have infinity and all that, but there has to be some sort of. We have to be able to put a cap on it. It's an important principle. Our desires for such things as we need, and because that desire has a place. I need to eat, right? There's nothing wrong with being hungry. Jesus was hungered in the wilderness. He was fasting and he was hungered, and he was tempted, but he endured the temptation, but he was hungry, and he felt the same thing that we feel when we have lust, but lust, it goes beyond. When you're hungry, you do indeed need to eat, and you have this craving to eat, when your belly is empty. But there's another craving that's about the will. I will have something better than this. I will have something more tasty. And that's, while I love tasty food, it's not wrong to eat things that taste good. We have to be mindful of what the hazard of that kind of thinking and of being too accustomed, or being accustomed, not being great, like when things don't turn out well, to be thankful. Not every meal is a masterpiece, They tempted God by asking meat. Again, that's what we talked about. I don't think I need to go over all those verses. We kind of discussed. The water came out of the rock. When Moses smote the rock, they needed water. The point was God provided for them. He provided manna. That's what he goes on to say. Can he give bread also? Can he? And bread mean not. He had provided bread, but they mean something more. So, sustaining food, flesh. Because and he was angry. Why? Because they believed not in God and trusted not in his salvation. It's not so much. Again, you could say, well, they didn't believe he existed. That's not so much what it means. They didn't believe in him, like he would take care of them, that he would be there for them. They had seen his wonders. They knew he was real, but they thought maybe he was bringing them out in the wilderness to kill them or something. They were very skeptical, but on a different level. And we also, sometimes I feel the same way sometimes. It's like I understand their feelings. I don't want to give way to that sort of negativity that doubts God's intention towards me. You know what I mean? I need to trust the salvation. It's not my salvation. I mean, I'm the one being saved, sure. In that sense, yes. But on a certain level, my salvation is really his salvation, because he is the one that works it. I only receive it. And in that sense, it's mine. But the responsibility for doing the saving falls completely on God. And that's why it is imperative that we should trust him. We trust him because he's the one who's going to save us. He never proposes to tell you you're going to save yourself or you're going to have to do this and that to be saved. It's like, no, trust me to be saved. Believe in me to be saved. That's what it requires. That's all that salvation requires. You know, getting saved, his salvation brings about works in you. We are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus unto good works. But those have nothing to do with bringing about your salvation. They're actually the result of his salvation of you and you continuing in your life to trust in that salvation. And as you trust in it, he works in you both to will and to do his good pleasure. But your only real contribution, so to speak, is the activity of continually believing in him. You know, faith is a gift from God, but we have to exercise it constantly. Just like my body is a gift from God also, that I have to exercise and use for it to be useful. Same thing with faith. Faith is the gift of God because we are saved by grace through faith and not of yourself. It is the gift of God, and I think that part points to the faith. Because grace, of course, grace, it seems redundant to call grace the gift of God because grace is grace. But Paul often did things like that, so I'd understand if someone argued the other way. But still, I not only say that because I think that it's not so much about that text as it is about the overall thrust of the New Testament, where it's clear that, that's the case, that God draws men to him, that blessed are your eyes for they see, blessed are your ears for they hear, because not everyone can hear and see this. I need 1 second here. I should have just muted, but whatever. Okay, sorry. I just had to do the baseball thing. All right, so the waters gushed out, streams overflowed, etc., etc. Can he provide flesh? He was wroth. Anger was kindled against Jacob. Fire was kindled against Jacob. Fire is being put there symbolically for anger. Anger against Israel, using both names. The natural name, the name of him before, from his birth, Jacob, usurper, and or was it contender maybe? And Israel, the Prince of God, something like that, right? Because they believe not in God, nor trusted in his salvation. Though he had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven, he'd provided things. He rained down manna upon them. He had done that already. And then they were asking, can God provide meat? Can he? Because here's the thing. It's one thing to ask God for something. I've asked for God, like it says in James, you ask amiss that you may consume it on your lust. A lot of times we ask things for God that's just really about what we want and not about really what we need and what's most important. A lot of times we're praying, at least throughout my life. Maybe not recently, because I hope I've learned a bit. But I remember there were times when I prayed things. I was mostly concerned with things that were not God's concern, not really what He thought I needed. Because you need a car, huh? I think you need some other. I think there's other priorities, Paul. More important things than that I'd prefer you be praying about. So we're not gonna. I'm not going to reaffirm you in your lack of progress in this thing by answering a prayer that is, unless you should think I'm happy with you. I want you to change. Happy in the sense of I'm not satisfied. I want more out of you. I want to adjust things. They believed not in God, trusted not in his salvation. They had commanded the clouds, opened the doors, rained down manna, given them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. This is where Yeah, though he had done all this, he still sent them meat to the full. That is kind of like it kind of needs that colon there. He caused an east wind to blow, and by his power he brought in the south wind. You get the east wind blowing the south wind, you get some whirling, weather system. And again, it blew in a bunch of birds, and they fell from the sky. It rained flesh upon them as dust, feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea. And he let it fall all around, and they ate, and they were well filled. He gave them what they want. They were not strange from their lust. But while their meat was yet in their mouth, the wrath of God came upon them. This is the thing. It's like, God will give the wicked exactly what they want sometimes. Oh, that's what you want? Really? And that they may fulfill or fill up their evil to the full. That he may strike them down in the moment of their glory. He slew the fattest of them and smote down the chosen men of Israel. And again, they were not estranged from their lust. Oh, they had their lust to the fill. For all this they sin still believe not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. This is more of like talks about just cycle after cycle, because this happened many times where Israel just it's hard to keep a nation faithful in the long term. And it's instructive. These are our examples. We have to understand like what they did not. We have to have our eyes open to what God is showing to us. Their days he did consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When he slew them, that's vanity is gonna. I gotta look at it. Verse 26 or 7, somewhere around there. No, it was 31 or something. Yeah. 33. Vanity is Hebel, vapor, breath. Oh, great. Fine. But the idea of something that is insubstantial, nothing, worthless, we have so much time in this life to make what we can of it and make what we can of ourselves. Jesus said, sufficient to the day is the evil thereof. I mean, because some people understand it's like, hey, man, we got to take hold of the time we've got. Seize the day. This is not something that's just, a lot of, this is well understood by many people. You don't have to even be a Christian to understand. It's like, I've got limited time here, and what can I do with my time, right? Let's not waste it. Let's redeem the time. But some people, one of the most tragic things is they frit their lives away in worthless and empty activities. They produce nothing of substance. They only live to consume. They only live to exist and to be pleasured. They earn their money. They spend it on themselves. They flit away their time in useless pursuits that do not improve them, but only amuse them. It's a tragic and, in some ways, wicked end. And when God gives someone over to that, their days are consumed in vanity. It's like you could be filling your days with significance, but instead your days are filled with foolishness. And there's nothing more depressing when you look back on a life frittered away. I think that has been just foolish, empty pursuits that are neither benefit to anyone nor to yourself, really. Benefit in the sense of making you a better person. You sit around all the time and just consume things, entertainment and stuff like that, and food, and it's like it's not what God is. Well, like when he talks about the talents, we've been given life, we've been given this opportunity. It's high time to rise up and seek God, and to figure out what your purpose is. You have one. You don't want to come to God with your talent and be like, I buried it somewhere. Here it is. Here's my life. It got buried in the earth. I was too busy, doing nothing to do anything. I was too busy doing nothing to do anything. But I will say, don't think a meaningful job is doing something, and certainly, but to me, that's something you judge yourself. I don't mean to judge anybody's in particular, but I do know that I just remember lives where people, it's not so much that you just work, it's just that all your time away from earning what you need to live is spent in worthless, empty pursuits. That's what you want. That's what I'm saying. Is like, yes, you have to live. You have to make a living. And that's an honorable thing to do. And afterwards, you deserve to rest. I mean, especially if you're working tons of hours and stuff. I'm just saying, you better make time for the Lord and all that. Lest your days be consumed in vanity. Because all that working and stuff, though it's honorable and good, it's still vanity in the end. Because you can't take it with you. I mean, it's like if you're using all that to support a family, and you can take some of that with you. The relationships you form, the good things you do for other people in the name of Christ, you can take that with you. And so like I said, it's being used for something more than I'm just seeing like a person just shutting themselves in, working a meaningless job that does not fulfill them. You can't live like that. You got to get out of that. I mean, as far as most of the time, I think those people know that because it's not fun. I spent some time in that. When I was in college, before I really found the Lord, I think that's kind of how my life felt. Like everything was empty. Everything was vain and worthless. And much troubled about things that just aren't important. There's all this trouble. Oh, I got all this trouble. But my troubles all just consume me. Everyone's got trouble. But the question is, where are you consumed by it? It's like the trouble would build us up rather than, in the world you shall have tribulation. And so it says that. You will have, but fear not, I've overcome the world. That's what the Lord Jesus said. When he slew them, then they sought him. The people, survived. He would slay people, and consequences would come. Oh, they're like, oh God, yeah. And then they returned and inquired early after. Yes, and that ultimately was the case. Like I said, it eventually they after the return from Babylon, they felt very strongly lesson learned, and also the fact that anyone coming back from Babylon was highly motivated by, in particular, their desire to return to Jerusalem, to Zion, to the place of God's holy name, and to rebuild the temple and etc. Because they were still, these things were still meaningful to them. They weren't the ones who were the reason it was destroyed in the first place. But like I said, things have to happen, and the innocent are carried along. It's like when the nation goes astray, the innocent suffer with the guilty. Famine in the land affects everybody. Not that God doesn't have his way of preserving his servants, but the normal way of doing things is disrupted. When he stood and they saw him, they returned early and inquired after God. They remembered God was their rock and their high God was a redeemer. Yeah, they're like, oh, God's our rock, our redeemer. I feel that way too sometimes. Things happen, and sometimes bad things happen, and then and I say, oh, what a state I'm in, and I turn to God more forcefully. I mean, over my life, that's been like a series of me course correcting ever more carefully to try to keep staying on course with God. And sometimes we are chastised, like they were because though men were slain, the nation was chastised. You know what I mean? Because all the people were not destroyed, and the people whom God had mercy on received mercy. And so then the near generation after that is going to be like, hey, we just went through a lot. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth and they lied unto him with their tongues. See, because what happens is everyone starts getting more religious and everyone starts, becoming, it becomes the in thing again. And then you get people who are fakers. Just like, they're like, oh, is it all about God now again? Oh, sure, I'm all about God too. Like our last president. I mean, like I said, on some level, I find it refreshing to have someone just kiss the Bible, like publicly showing that absolutely no shame or any kind of reservation about honoring our God. Our God. Honoring the God of the Scriptures, of Jesus. And so I find that refreshing, even though I know it's for theater. But like that's you better put that theater on for me. It shows respect on some level. It's like we respect the God of our fathers. But it's also dangerous because that insincerity leads to sin. And so our hearts will not be steadfast. Like I said, it's like, though I liked the last president more than this one, I thought the pandemic, it was all pathetic. It's like, because he allowed those doctors to run roughshod over him. I thought he was a big, tough guy, strong leader. Yeah, except for when he wasn't. Except for when he was letting himself be pushed around by that little doctor. Some people don't know how to handle doctors and stuff like that. They forget that they're just other people. And then like you can fire him. I thought that was what he was famous for. You're fired. I like that. Yeah. Should have gone to Washington and should have fired a lot more people. But you can't do that. You can't do that. Just like with this stuff. There are all kinds of people who telling the people we send to run the country what they can and can't do. Unelected people. Like what you get to do, Anyways, so when we have flatterers who are not steadfast in their heart, they're always going to let you down. They're not going to have the moral fortitude. I mean, still, like I've said, I'd vote for that guy again over anybody else I've seen, except, some other people, depending on what's going on at the time, right? But, there's a certain people I have absolutely zero enthusiasm for. Who are in politics. I look at 90% of those people, like in politics, any given senator, absolutely, they do nothing for me. Because I see them all as lying, flattering, deceitful people. They are just parasites, essentially, and not really looking out for our best interests. But are mostly looking out to stay in the position they're in. And in so much as it is necessary to do that, they will do things to benefit one group or another, or all the people, maybe, But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity and destroyed them not. Destroyed them not utterly, Yes, he slew some, but he destroyed the nation not. Many a time turned he his anger away, and did not stir up all his wrath. God did not fully, and many examples, such as these, it was not everybody. Just like the gainsaying of Korah, his son, not Korah and his sons were spared. They weren't there. You remember that they were but flesh. It's like he knows our frame. It's the New Testament. You know, a wind that passeth away and cometh not again. That's our life. You know, we are just we have a very brief time. I said that's why it's important. Cough. The other day I didn't do it because of I woke up with a cold almost, and I just don't feel fully like I'm breathing right. All right. So God being full of, God is full of compassion. He understands our weakness, and because the thing is, God doesn't. With none of his servants has he ever been like, you better be totally perfect, though he has called us to that. But he has called us to perfection, but he will give us great mercy and leeway as far as, primarily now because of the blood of Christ, but God always was a God of mercy. And so that's why it was called the sure mercies of David, because he did not take his mercy away from him in spite of anything that David did. David did nothing that caused God to remove from him his mercy. Though he did things that were of the level of where you would consider that to be like something that, hey, the fearful, the unbelieving, the abominable, and murderers, and fornicators, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone. You know what I mean? There's very absolute statements like all of those people, all of them. But of course, you aren't reckoned as such because the blood of Christ has washed away your sins. So you're not a liar or a fornicator, even though you've definitely committed a lie. That's one I can point everybody. You've lied. You've lied. You've lied. We've all done it. And those are the things for which the children of disobedience are ultimately destroyed. But we commit them also. The thing is, we got to be careful to be honest with God. As I said, they flatter him with their tongue. Oh Lord, we worship thee, we worship thee. We love God. Oh God, God, God. I'm so into Jesus. I got my Jesus pin, my Jesus cross, my Jesus hand bracelet, my Jesus bumper sticker. I got my little fish on the back of my car. I love Jesus. Not that there's anything, some people like to let people know they're a Christian. Go right ahead. No, I think it's very, bold in some ways, as far as on the car and all that, But because I try to be, I'm a safe driver for the most part, but it's like I've always been a little bit wary of having the Lord have to answer for my driving. You know what I mean? Like putting, it's and not that I think I'm bad at it, but it's but I have made mistakes at times in the past, and I guess I still feel apprehensive that I might do it again. So, I wouldn't want to do it with one of my, little Jesus fishes in the back of the car. Seems like wrong to drag the Lord into it. As far as the car isn't Christian, it's me. And the driving isn't Christian, the living is Christian. And I try to drive like a Christian too, obviously. The rules of the road pretty much get you about as much as you need to worry about driving like a Christian. You know what I mean? Just obey the rules because it's safest for everybody. But he being full of compassion forgives iniquity, yes. God forgives us because of Christ. And then for them, it was because of the covenant with Abraham. He would not go back on his promise that he would make them a great nation and that all the kindreds of the world would be blessed in them. And that hadn't been seen when this was even written yet. But they still believed in this promise. How oft they did provoke him in the wilderness. Verse 40, right? Many times. They murmured. They grumbled. God's let us out in this wilderness to die. Can he provide meat? We're thirsting. We're going to die for lack of water. Now they limited, verse 41, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They tested him. It's not the same kind of thing. You cannot be tempted with evil, meaning to do evil, to succumb to evil, to lust for evil things. The lust of evil things is not in him. But he can be tempted by our evil to, meaning like his goodness is being tested. Don't do that. Though sometimes it says, ask me now and see if I do not pour out a blessing for you. Test me with this. And it's about our attitude. We need to be like every time I ask and pray for God, I'm sort of testing things, right? If I ask for the foolish thing, I'm doing it wrong. But God is merciful, especially because we're dealing with him on the basis of grace through faith through the blood of Christ. So God is he's not looking at us through the lens of disobedience and our former lust, but rather through he's looking at us according to the image of what he is creating in us in Christ. Like he sees us standing before him on the day at the judgment seat of Christ, on the day of judgment, vindicated, and he sees himself rewarding us and giving us all the things promised in the scriptures, the white stone and all that. He sees that all being done. That's what he sees, the person that is the result of all his work, because he knows what he's making. So when he looks at me, he doesn't see the old sinful Paul. He sees the new man created in Christ Jesus. That's his vision for me. He knows I'm not there yet, but that's his work. But trusting in salvation is what means that, I know it's going to work out. I have to believe that. It's part of what, because that's what faith really is. It's trusting God. Limited. I see it's like off a bit. Limited the Holy One of Israel. What? Oh, I see. The quick definition says probably to pain or wound. So this is a word that is probably occurs once in the scripture. Oh yeah, look at that. One occurrence. Tava. Probably to pain. Brown driver brakes, probably to pain. Interesting. Probably to pain. Strong's, it says to scrabble. Set a mark. Through a similar idea of scraping to pieces, to grieve, like to wound. Limit. The King James translated it limit by confusing it with another word, which is, I'm sorry. This is the part I was looking at. This is from the Strong's Concordance, And interesting, it's a primitive root, or perhaps identical with tava, through similar idea of scraping to pieces, to grieve. Limit by confusion with tava. I'm not going to look at. There's some word study there for people who really want to do a lot of word study. I want to keep moving through it. So it doesn't mean limit. So the King James translators got it wrong there, most likely. But it means to grieve. Now I could work with limited actually, because I thought, wow, that's interesting. They set limits on God. Like they didn't trust his salvation. I don't think, because they did. So, can God provide a table in the wilderness? So I'm sure to the King James translators, it probably seemed like that's a reasonable translation. Tava, okay, yeah. They limited him. But apparently the scholars today don't think that was correct. So it seems to be consensus. Probably to wound or grieve. They grieved him. They tempted God. They grieved him. Okay, yeah, all that's true. I mean, you don't have, like I said, we don't have to get, the cool thing about it is you don't have to get the text exactly right. It's all right. All of that's correct. They said limits on God. They didn't believe he could do what he said he'd do. You know what I mean? They didn't think he could help them defeat the giants. So, you know, I don't have I kind of like that mistranslation, if mistranslation it is. You know. For the King James only crowd, they'd be like, no, this is the right one. And you've got it right. You got it right. They limited him. Wow, we're over an hour. I got to go. I didn't realize I was passing out. Okay. We'll pick it up at verse 42 tomorrow. Thanks for joining me this day. Look forward to being back again tomorrow. Until then.
Yahweh reigneth, he is clothed with majesty.
Yahweh's clothes he girdeth himself.
The world also is established, that it cannot be moved.
Thy throne is established of old.
The floods have lifted up, O Lord, the floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves.